Good evening, my name is John Atkinson. I'm the editor of Stereophile magazine, and I'm sitting here at the Los Angeles audio show with Andrew Jones. I'd say veteran speaker designer because I've known Andrew since he was at KEF, and then TAD, and then Pioneer, and now with ELAC. And he made his name 2 years ago now by introducing the debut series from ELAC, a series of very affordable stand mount loudspeakers. Then a year ago introduced the Unify, was it called?
Unify, yeah.
Unify, which used a relatively sophisticated coaxial tweeter mid-range unit. And now at the Los Angeles audio show, we have the Adante, a very complex floor stander costing what, $5,000?
$5,000 a pair, yes.
So Andrew, first let's start off with affordable loudspeakers. What are the challenges when you came out with the ELAC debut series in producing a high-performance loudspeaker with a build budget which must be relatively small?
I'd had some advanced experience of it with the Pioneer budget speakers. And first of all, it's the level of expectation. What do you think can be done at that price point? And so often when you examine speakers that are at that price point, you know, yeah, they were built to the expectation that it's only $100 or whatever. If instead you think differently, then take the experience of what I had with the TAD speakers, for example. In my mind, I have an idea of what can be achieved, both in terms of just the speaker design, but overall presentation of the sound. With that, you can start to look and say, do I have to be satisfied with what is customary at that price point, or can I try and do better?
Yeah.
And certainly with the Pioneer, I was surprised when I started the design process that I didn't immediately dumb it down. I just said, this is what I'd like to be able to do, a proper design with a proper crossover and well-designed drivers. Let's start to cost that out, and then if I have to backtrack and start pulling components out, then so be it.
Yeah.
But I was surprised with the manufacturing facility we were using, which I have 15 years of experience of working with, that I could pretty much do what I set out to do. And so the level of compromise was not as great as you might think.
Yeah, I mean, compromises involving ultimate loudness and low frequency extension
and cabinet resonance or whatever. Yeah. But what you're doing is trying to balance all these different competing objectives, competing for price, let's say.
Yeah.
How much to spend on the crossover versus the cabinet versus the drivers. And so armed with that, and in a sense being surprised by how good it became, then the first job with ELAC was, okay, let's go in that direction. We want to expand ELAC's business, and that seemed an obvious way to do it.
Yes, I mean, ELAC's a venerable German company, and you came to them and you saw a market opportunity for them in the United States with affordable loudspeakers.
Yes, because they hadn't really penetrated significantly the American market. And spending a couple of years designing a flagship at that point wouldn't have really advanced the business and the exposure here.
Yeah.
But what we'd tapped into with affordable speakers seemed the ideal way to go.
Yeah.
Always the thought of, if you've got a mid-high-end company, are you going to devalue the company if you do very low-cost product? But I think proven with TAD, with some of the Pioneer EX speakers, with the KEF speakers, with Infinity, that I can pretty much tackle any product price category and do good designs. So that meant I'm not devaluing ELAC, I'm actually giving customers something that they like ELAC as a brand, but few people could afford some of those models. Now there's a way to get into the ELAC brand, and also for me to provide almost a service, get really good affordable product.
If you, as let's say ELAC is a new speaker company in the United States because it wasn't well represented here, coming up with something which is the same as everyone else is doing at that price is not going to be a formula for success.
Exactly.
But if you can offer your customers more than they anticipate getting for that price, now that gives you, what do they call it, a unique sales point, or whatever the marketing jargon is. But then, so first round was for debut speakers, then the unified speakers, but now I've been surprised to see this relatively expensive tower at the show. So what is the basis for this step up in a product design?
So it goes back to who is ELAC as a company.
Yeah.
So joining them, the first task was to get exposure and serve a need that we saw in the marketplace for good performing product. But there's still all the other product categories, product price points that ELAC do. And at some point, those need renewing or adding to. So just because I started with the very affordable doesn't mean that that's all I'm going to do with ELAC.
No, that was your opportunity at that time.
Right, and now we've got that exposure, so many people would come to me and go, well, I bought your ELAC debut or unifies for the bedroom or for the office or for my friends, but when are you going to design something more expensive that is in the price category that I as an audiophile want to spend? So that was, well, just wait and see. I'm going to be doing it. And so that was part of the reasoning behind introducing these. Yeah. And also, you have to be careful if you're doing just progressive price points from 250 to 500. Well, that increment for some people is affordable, so they'll wait till the $500 version comes out. Well, are you going to do $1,000 next? Because I can afford 500, and I can stretch to 1,000. And all the time, it's people who are going, well, I won't buy your current one because I think I can afford your next one. Yes. And so in one way, you can cut them off at the knees. Yes.
Well, you're giving them reasons not to buy your product.
Right.
Now, looking at the Andante, this coaxial unit looks similar to what you had in the Unify, but it's a development of it, right?
It is a development. So again, every drive unit I develop is new and custom for the range. I don't go out in the market and buy drivers. I develop them from scratch. So this is a further refinement of the Unify concentric driver, and it goes to a larger cone to give me more output capability, larger voice coil to give me more room to engineer better tweeter with better low frequency performance, so I can cross over lower at 2 kHz in this example. And the bigger cone allows me to cross over to the bass drivers lower at 200 Hz in this case.
And these are not the bass drivers, these aren't the woofers, right? These 3 diaphragms, they're acoustic bass radiators?
In the old British way of saying it, yes.
We are all British people, Andrew.
Yes.
So where are the woofers hiding?
So the woofers are all inside. These are lightweight passive radiators. So in a typical low frequency bass alignment system, you have, let's say, parallel operation. Yeah. On the surface of the box, you have both the active bass driver and the passive radiator.
Yeah, which replaces a port.
Which replaces a port. And acoustically, it has to be heavy. So they're typically weighted down with weights glued on, and they get a bad rap. People say, oh, that moving mass, it must mean slow bass, which is not exactly true if designed right. This is a very different approach, and it comes from my experience at KEF with, although I didn't work directly on the speaker, but the 1042.
Yes, so you coupled cavity.
Coupled cavity. And
woofers inside, port on the front.
Yes. Now, putting a cavity, an extra chamber over the front of the bass driver that vents the outside world, is effectively an acoustic low-pass filter. And so it turns the system naturally into a bandpass. Yes. Which is what you're going to be doing anyway in a 3-way system.
With your electrical crossover.
Yes. You've got a wideband bass driver. It rolls off at low frequencies, okay? And then you put an electrical network to roll it up high frequencies to turn it electroacoustically into a bandpass system. This does it almost fully acoustically as a bandpass system. Second order roll off at high frequencies. Now, part of the action of doing that gives you an extra reduction in driver excursion for a given output level. Right. So you can get more out of your drive unit. But secondly, as a low-pass filter on the output of the driver, rather than a low-pass filter on the input, any nasties generated by the driver...
The distortion harmonics are going to be rolled off.
They are. Not obviously the very low frequency fundamental tones and their harmonics, but as you go up in frequency, where distortion products become more audible, it's arguable whether how audible the distortion of a 20 hertz tone is. There's audibility curves,
Yes,
right? So they have some effect, but certainly as you're getting up towards 100 hertz, the harmonics at 300 and 500 are going to be more audible. These get rolled off with that filter. And it's a further development of the coupled cavity in that it's not just a driver separating the two chambers. The ports, there are internal ports operating between the two chambers.
Between the cavity that lowers the woofer and the cavity between the radiators and the woofer.
Yes. So you've got a lot of degrees of freedom that you're trying to play with and optimize.
I was going to say, the mathematical modelling of that must be complex indeed.
Yes, it was. And
yes, it was. Yes, it was. He says it was nothing.
I was almost in despair. Production won't quite be when I thought it was going to be because I was still playing with that.
Yeah.
But once I got it right and started to listen to it, I thought, ooh, it actually works. So I persevered, and that's what you see here. But there is a practical thing. They're 8-inch passive radiators with a 6-inch or 6.5-inch active bass drive inside. There is actually an acoustic reason for that.
Right.
For one thing, that the larger a radiator, the lower its acoustic mass for a given physical mass. And I needed that because I need low acoustic mass for the passive radiator.
Right.
But there's a practical reason. How do I get the bass driver inside the cabinet?
Oh.
If the passive radiator was the same size, it won't go in there. So you make it bigger and it goes in.
Okay.
If you remember back to the Lin isobaric,
Yes.
that used KEF B139s.
Yeah, pair of them back to back.
Yes.
Like that.
Now, whatever you think of the reasons for choosing a KEF B139 in terms of quality of a driver, and for its day, it was a very high quality driver, it was also the only driver available that fit through its own hole. Because it's a racetrack shape, so you can turn it around and put it in. So either good thinking.
I once tried a pair of Lin isobarics on my bass guitar and found that the B139 actually didn't have a lot of dynamic range.
No, it doesn't.
Not a lot of excursion.
Yes. Yeah. And so one of the reasons why it's 200 hertz crossover is that's only as high as I could manage to get the bandpass to operate. There's a natural limit to how wide a band you can do that, and so that, again, that's the reason why it's a larger driver.
One final question: what is this spider's web over the tweeter cone?
It's the finger poke thing. So you always put some kind of protective grill over, because although we have a full height grill to cover this, when you're listening it's off and people are always going to poke the tweeter. Okay,
so it's not an acoustic.
So it's not, and you want it to have either zero acoustic effect as much as you can, or if you look like Paradigm, their recent speakers, carefully positioned holes, they're a way of making it part of the acoustic loading of the diaphragm to improve the response. In this case, ELAC have their crystal woofer technology for the bass drivers. And we looked at that, and I saw it 5 or 6 years ago at a Munich show and thought, that's cool. And then I ended up working with ELAC. But we thought, wouldn't it be a nice idea to pick up the shape of that crystal structure and mimic in the grill? But unless you know that, you think it looks like a spider's web up front.
Well, now I know it's cool, I will no longer think it's a spider's web. Well, thank you, Andrew. And that's been a fascinating tour around this new speaker and looking at some of the innards, the internals of the Andante. And when is it coming to market?
We go into pre-production second week of July, so it will be available later August.
I look forward to hearing it under more familiar circumstances. Well, thank you.
Pleasure.